Hello and welcome to Because Hobby. Today we're going to be painting a white skull with the Warhammer 40,000 paints and tools set. We're going to be using Corax White, Abaddon Black, Mephiston Red, Tesseract Glow, Lead Belcher, Runelord Brass, Agrax Earthshade, Retributor Armour, and Runefang Steel. But of course we're going to start with Corax White. And here's my white scar. I primed him with Wraithbone. You could just paint him with Corax White or spray him with Corax White or paint him with Wraithbone as it's available in a pot too. We're going to get our Corax White and give it a good shake. It's very chalky paint, you want to shake it as much as possible. And you want to get quite a bit on your palette because you're going to need more than one coat for this one. As you can see, I'm getting a lot there. Give your brush a good rinse. And just keep adding water to that paint until it thins down. You're going to need quite a bit of water because you've got quite a bit of white on the palette. But just look for that milk-like consistency I've mentioned before, and you'll be good to go. As always, test the coverage on the back of your nail like me if you want to. No need to wipe the excess off anywhere. And just start painting it all over that Space Marine. Don't worry about getting it somewhere you shouldn't, because the whole model's painted white anyway. So just make sure you get all those armor panels with a nice even coat of white. This will take you a long time. I believe it took me about 2 or 3 coats to get a flat, clean white that I was happy with, and that's what we're really looking for here. Just that nice, flat, clean white. It doesn't have any lumps and bumps or look a bit strange in places. Just keep it thinned down because, as I said, the paint's very chalky, it can be very thick, and you will see your brush strokes if you don't. So just keep going and I'll bring you back when we're done. Okay, so now he's all coated with white. It will take you a few coats like I said. And we're going to move on to Abaddon Black. Now this is quite a worrying moment when you paint a white model. You need to do the black parts because obviously if you get that black on some of the armor panels, it's not going to look very good. But just take your time, try and be as neat as possible, but always know that you can go over it with the white again. But I will not lie to you when I tell you that it's going to be very, very difficult to cover that black again. You're going to need quite a few coats of the white, and if you make a lot of mistakes, it will look quite patchy. But just thin down your black as you would any other colour. Just make sure you haven't got an absolute load on your brush. Just enough to paint what you need to paint. And just cover the weapon, the bolt gun, the cracks in the armour that we always do, the vents on the backpack. All those areas need to be coated in black. You probably will need 2 coats because it's over white. But once you get that done, you can move on to the next step. So I'm going to get it finished here, and I'll bring you back when I'm done. Okay, so once we've finished all our black parts, we're going to move on to Mephiston Red. Now we're going to be using Mephiston Red mainly for the chest eagle and the armor trim, so just the shoulder pad trim. So you don't need a lot of Mephiston Red, just take a little bit and pop it on your palette. As always, make sure you're thinning it down. I can never quite get red right first time. But once you're happy, just start painting that eagle. Make sure you're very careful just tracing around the eagle, because again this model's white, so it is very difficult to cover any colour. Red shouldn't pose as much a problem as black would, but it's still rather irritating. Just nicely, carefully tracing out the shape of that eagle, and the same with the shoulder pads. I took my time with the eagle, so I'm just going to move you onto the shoulder pad just to show you how to do that. Just make sure you're gripping him nice and tightly, you've got good balance, and you should be able to trace it out with no problem at all. I'll bring you back when I finish mine. Okay, it's done on the model. We're going to move on to Runelord Brass. As always with metallics, give them a good shake. And again, you won't need much Runelord Brass, so just a little bit on your palett's all you need. After you thinned it down like I have, just take your model, make sure you haven't got a lot on your brush, and just paint the shells inside the magazine if you've got an auto bolt rifle, and if not, just move straight to the insignia. Just trace it out like I am, only the tip of the brush touching it, so you're unlikely to touch the actual parts of the bolt gun you don't want Runelord Brass. You just pick it out, same way you did the chest eagle. You probably need 2 coats here, and then you can move on to the next part. I'll bring you back when mine's all finished. Okay, so here he is with the Runelord Brass parts done. We'll now move on to Lead Belcher. As always with metallics, make sure you're giving it that very good shake. And you're going to need a fair amount of Lead Belcher, so make sure you've got a bit on your palette. Again, thinning it down. And we're just going to paint all the parts of the bolt gun that need to be silver. So the handle, the back, the stock thing. I think I said in a previous video it's not actually a stock, but it's in the area that a stock would be. Obviously the barrel, the receiver, which I think is what I'm painting now, and just make sure you're going around the model, painting all the parts that need to be Lead Belcher, Lead Belcher. This model's got a knife, so obviously I'm going to be painting the handle of the knife that's in the sheath, and if your person's got any accessories that you'd like to paint with bolt gun metal, make sure you pick those out now. I'll bring you back when I'm finished. Okay, so with the bolt gun and everything else that's meant to be Lead Belcher painted, we're going to move on to Tesseract Glow for his eyes. Hopefully this will go a little bit better than it did with the Imperial Fist, because his eyes are already white. So just get that little bit on your brush like I talked about in the last video. You don't want too much because it's very watery, and just sort of let it flow into the eye lenses. It shouldn't take much effort to let that happen on its own. It's very, very watery. And just let that dry, perhaps go over it maybe 2 or 3 times to achieve the right effect, and then you can move on to the next step. I'll bring you back when I've done that. Okay, so with the Tesseract Glow parts done, we're going to move on to some recess shading with Agrax Earthshade. Just take this straight out of the pot, you don't need to thin it down or anything. And you want a normal amount on your brush, not too much. And you just want to be following the natural cracks and crevices in the armour, just filling those with Agrax and not allowing it to pull onto the actual armour panels themselves. You're just going around the model, all the areas that have like a little seam or crack, you just want to fill that with Agrax Earthshade, because that's where a shadow would be if this model was real. Once you've done this over all the model, you'll notice how much it pops. It looks very, very good with a white power armor such as this. But I'll bring you back when mine's finished. Right, so with the recess shading done, it's time to move on to everyone's favourite part, edge highlighting. So we're going to start by edge highlighting everything that's black. So that's pretty much just the weapons and the pouches. We're going to use a 1-to-1 mix of Verbatim Black and Corax White. And as I've showed you in previous videos, just pop it on your palette, ideally next to the original colour, in this case black. You just add that same amount of white to the black on the palette. Just make sure you're rinsing your brush in between here, because you can get some of the paint in the other part and that's not a good idea. But really mix it round. You really want to make sure you've eliminated any chunks of either colour in it. And once you're happy with what you've got, you're not going to bother thinning it down because you're not using very much. Just take most of it off of your brush, either using your hand like me or a tissue. And then just run the edge of the brush along the hard edges of the object you're trying to highlight. For example, here the bolt gun, I'm just highlighting the casing. I'm just running the edge of my brush along all those areas I want highlighted during the magazine and any other area. This technique can be applied to almost every area on the model that you want to edge highlight. Those that it can't, unfortunately you will have to use the tip of your brush, but that's something I struggle with too, so it's something I can't really advise you on the best way to do, because I'm not very good at it myself. But you can get quite far into some nice edge highlights just by doing what I'm doing here. I'll bring you back when I'm finished. So with the black edge highlighted, we're going to move on to edge highlighting the red. For that, we're going to use a 1-to-1 mix of Mephiston Red and Corax White. Again, we're going to do the same thing here that we do with all paints when we mix them. Just pop it down next to the original colour so you've got a good comparison. Washing our brush in between. And you're just going to mix that round. Like I said for the black and white, just make sure you mix it round very nicely, make sure it's thoroughly mixed. And just when you're happy with what you've got, you can wash off your brush, pick up a little bit off the palette, and you're ready to highlight. So you can start with highlighting the eagle. You can just either run the brush over the top so you only catch the raised areas, or you can individually paint the farthest edge of each feather individually. I prefer to sort of do a mix of both. I tend to run it over the skull and over the hard edges at the top of the eagle, and then I try to sort of paint in some of the feathers. Just make sure you can see some of that original colour below it, and it should look very nice. With the shoulder pads, we're just going to use the same technique we use for all hard edges. We're just going to run the side of our brush along that hard edge until you can see the colour left behind. I'll bring you back when I'm finished. Okay, so with the red edge highlighted, we can move on to using Retributed Gold. We're going to be putting Retributed Gold on all the areas we previously painted Runelord Brass. We're going to use it like a layer. So we're going to leave the lowest areas still Runelord Brass, and then the high areas Retributor Armor. For this stage I don't bother thinning it because we're using so very little of it, but just pick out the top edges of the insignia and the highest points of the shells in the bolt guns magazine. I'm also picking out the end of the sheath for the knife. You can do this too if you have a sheath for your knife on your Space Marine, or if there are any areas that you want it to be gold, you can just repeat the same steps for those. I'll bring you back when I'm finished. So with the gold parts done, we're going to do the same thing now with the silver parts, and we're going to be using Runefang steel. And it's just going to be the same technique that we used for the Retributor armor parts. For all the parts that we previously painted lead belcher, we're just going to be edge highlighting them or layering up, for example, the stock area and the barrels. Those will be layered up. But areas like the little square vents on his backpack, we're just going to catch the edges. As you can see, I'm doing the receiver. I'm just catching those top areas of it. And I'm catching the raised areas on the back of the stock area now as well. So as I said, you just want to do that on any silver parts on the model. But I'll bring you back when I'm finished. Okay, so with that, believe it or not, he's done. I think we cut down on a lot of the times because you can't really edge highlight white armor. You could use a purer white, I suppose, than Corax white, but I think it would just look overdone and you probably wouldn't see it. But here he is all based up. So obviously this is another base that I made myself. It's just foam board with Astro Granite. You should be able to see a list of paints we used up on the screen now, and a nice big picture of him. I'm quite proud of him. The pose I picked was a little strange, but I'm trying to sort of communicate that he's reaching for his knife. So let me know if you think I managed to do that in the comments. Thank you to Iceman, who asked for a white scar or salamander. I'd actually already done this white scar when he asked, but I'll try and do a salamander in the future. I'm happy to do that. It's not something I can do with the little paint set here, but it's something that I can do with the paints I do own, so I'm more than happy to do that. And anyone else who's got any comments, criticisms or questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the comments. I love hearing from people, it's great. Thank you to everyone who's viewed and the few people who've subscribed so far. I really do appreciate it, and so does Polly. But for now, keep painting and I'll see you in the next video.